the first slide, which shows the lovely bit of underwater scenery on Rathlin. Rathlin is just on an island, an L-shaped island off the northeast corner of Northern Ireland. It's situated between Islay and Ballycastle. There's about 10 kilometres from Ballycastle, and this is the Mullican Tower that's you can see on the right. This is Church Bay on Rathlin, which is where the marina and the harbour is. So these are some dive boats where we were doing survey work back in between 2005 2010, and it was mainly Bernard, Claire Goodwin and Jen Jones who were surveying the sponges on Rathlin. This is a view. If I go back there, oops, sorry. If I go back just here, you can see some of the start of the white cliffs, the other side of the harbour wall. And this is the view from the southeast corner looking across to those cliffs. It's a really beautiful island. It's an ASSI on land for the geology, for the plant life, the birds, and then underwater, it's also a marine conservation zone. This is the short video that my youngest son did, and it was a Seasearch dive that was up on Rathlin, I think in July 2020. Bernard didn't like this because his mouth's hanging open. He thought he looked a bit daft, which of course made me do it. Oh my goodness. Yikes. All right. Oh, bugger. Here. Give me here. Not sure what happened there, Lily. Sorry.
Ships on the street. Then explores all day. restless.
Sorry. So yeah, he did that as a little project for fun. On the west of the island, there's a really impressive seabird colony, which is well worth visiting if you get a chance to land on the island. This is another short video of the encounter we had with the bottlenose dolphins, and they're quite common there in the summer. As long as Phil Wilkinson isn't in the boat, they really don't care when he's around. They seem to appear. And then basking sharks. I'm not sure if there's any at Rathlin at the moment, but they do see them there fairly regularly in summer. I think this photograph was taken in around 2007. So this is the boundaries for the marine protected areas. So in blue is the marine special area of conservation and protected area for the seabirds, and then the larger black outlined box is the marine conservation zone boundary. Why is Rathlin so important from a conservation perspective? It's got a very high number of Northern Ireland priority species and also priority habitats. The diversity of species is very high. It's also unique in that a lot of the species that are found there aren't found anywhere else, or they're only known from a couple of other localities in Northern Ireland. And compared with other sites, it's still in a relatively natural, undisturbed state. These photographs were taken back in 1984 when they were doing a survey all around the Northern Ireland coast. And this is a photograph of one of those priority habitats with slow growing and fragile sponges and amphizoans. And in amongst that habitat that you can see here with all these beautiful cup-shaped sponges, there are also scallops, unfortunately. And there was quite a big fishery for the scallops during that time. You can see this is one of the scallop dredging boats just outside of Church Bay. But in 2016, no coincidence, 2016, it came in under the EU Habitats and Birds Directive. And during that time, they brought in regulations to ban the use of mobile fishing gear within that marine conservation area. I'm not actually going to do this one. No, we're not going to have any more videos. So what makes Rathlin so special and different to the other areas we have in Northern Ireland? And there's really, I think, two important factors at least at play. So the tidal streams, when they're running into the Irish Sea, they come along both, and it comes along this way and splits, goes around both sides of the island. And then when it's coming back out of the Irish Sea, it hits the east side of the island and splits. And you can see how it gets funneled between the mainland. And if you imagine the Mull of Kintyre and Islay here, it also gets really accelerated along this coast and here. And in addition to the main currents in and out of the Irish Sea, you get lots of eddies and spin-offs. So current is something that a lot of marine invertebrates like. But also bathymetry is important. So that's the contours on the seabed and the depth. I'm just going to show you this site here on the northwest of the island. It's a beautiful limestone archway. And I don't know if you can see the depth contours, but here we have 10 meters. And here just offshore, we have 150 meters, and out here 200 meters. And there's really nowhere else on the island of Ireland where we have such deep water in close proximity to the shore. So it really does shelve away. And I think the limestone is also important. There's some things that we only get in limestone that we don't get on other types of geology. So this is the archway at Rucallan, and I've just got some underwater photographs to let you see what it's like. It's a beautiful swim through. This is the top of the arch where it has this forest kelp, Laminaria hyperborea, and then lots of folios, red algae, sea anemones, deadman's fingers, and elephant's ear sponges. And then this is part of the archway, and you see lots of the deadman's fingers, but also this colonial anemone, which we're calling Parazoanthus axonelli, although it may be one of those species where there's more than one species and perhaps we're not using the right name. And that's part of the things that we are trying to disentangle with this project at Queen's. So this is a beautiful swim through. I don't know if any of you saw the BBC Water World where they had Dal Grimison, who sadly died last year, and he's swimming through the archway in that. On the archway, in addition to the normal deadman's fingers, we get this much more smaller, more slender and baby pink soft coral called Alcyonium hibernicum, and it was originally described from Ireland, which is why it's called hibernicum. And then you can see lots of the big veined squirt here, Dendrodoa rossularia. This is some of the diverse sponges and cup corals and sea anemones that you can see when you go diving on Rathlin. Every little bit of rock is covered in life. The visibility is usually pretty good there, so it's an excellent place if you're interested in underwater photography. And then lots of the elephant's ear sponge, which is very common there, Pachymatisma johnstoni, as well as a diversity of encrusting sponges, and again, the big being sea squid. I mentioned earlier about whether this yellow trumpet anemone, Parazoanthus, and whether it is axonelli or not. There's lots and lots of this in particular areas in Rathlin. If we look at the distribution of it in Northern Ireland, Rathlin's the only place where we get that colonial anemone. This is what's called Parazoanthus axonelli in the Mediterranean. So this is taken in Marseille. Parazoanthus axonelli was originally described from the Mediterranean, and the reason it was called axonelli was because it's always associated with this sponge Axonella damicornis. Now on Rathlin we've got loads of Axonella damicornis, and we have the yellow trumpet anemone, but it's never on the Axonella the Axonella damicornis that is really abundant in Damicornis Bay and Rathlin. So it seems that ecologically the Parazoanthus that we get in Rathlin is differentiated from the Mediterranean species. If you take a minute to just look at this photograph and you see how much life is there, it really is fabulous, and especially for sponges, which was why Bernard was keen to get funding to investigate the sponges on Rathlin more with a dedicated project from 2005 to 2010. In addition to the normal cup coral Caryophylla smithi, which has often this orange band, it's oval in outline and green iridescence, you also get this much smaller cup coral called Caryophylla inornata, and it's one of these Northern Ireland priority species. So it's one to look out for. If I know some of the Seasearch divers are planning to go up there this weekend. So it's more round in outline rather than oval. It's smaller. The knobs on the tentacles relative to the size are much bigger, and it doesn't have the iridescence. And that's a close-up of it. You can see even the tentacles are much more rugose than the normal cup coral. So I mentioned a bit about the sponge biodiversity and the project that Bernard and Claire Goodwin were involved with. So they described a number of new species from Rathlin, and this is a photograph of, I think, Claire underwater with, you can see she's got a wide angle lens on here and a collecting bag for the sponges, and they've got some oxygen for when they were decompressing. And this is one of the species that they described. It looks like sheets of shiny yellow plastic, and it can be really quite large sheets. You only get it on limestone. And this new species they called calcicola, which means limestone loving. So that was described in 2007 from Rathlin. And then Axonella parva, which is a Northern Ireland priority species. You can see it's on the Maidens off Larne and then up on Rathlin and nowhere else. And Bernard's been diving so much around Ireland, and they haven't found it elsewhere. So it really is something that's quite unique to that North Channel area. So that's its distribution on a worldwide scale. And then a few other species that they described that are found in Rathlin and that are rare elsewhere. Forbus punctata. I don't expect you to get these names, but they don't have common names, and for the people that are interested in putting the names on, and the talk's being recorded, so it might help to go back and revisit if you see something and you're not sure what it is you saw and you want to check with the talk. And then this Lysodendrorix Jen Jonesii, they named after Jen Jones, who was another biologist who did a lot of the field work with them. And this Hymeraphia brini, they named after Joe Breen, who was one of the marine biologists at the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, who had helped with the project. This golf ball sponge, Tethia citrina, is quite common. You'll see it, most places around the Irish coast if you go diving. Prior to the work they were doing up on Rathlin, the Tethia citrina was thought to be the only species of Tethia that we had in Northern Ireland. And then Bernard kept finding these much smaller golf balls that they never seemed to get bigger. They weren't bright yellow. The surface had a different texture. So he did some collaborative work with people in Germany, and that was a new species that they named Hibernica after Ireland in 2007. So there's really been quite a lot of new exciting stuff done on Rathlin, and I think Seasearch can play an important part in helping us in the future going forward to better understand our biodiversity. I was just going to say a little bit here about how we know when we've got a new species. One of the things we do is we look at the morphology. So with sponges, they have, most of them have skeletons made up of what we call spicules. These ones are made of glass, and they're often very detailed, but very tiny, maybe only a few to a couple of 100 microns in length. So we look at the spicules, we compare them with, highlighted here, I've said about this species Hymeraceus stolifera, which was described by Barbank, who worked at the Natural History Museum in London in the 1800s. Now, up until Bernard and Claire did their work, this Hymeraceus stolifera was the only species of Hymeracea in the world. It was thought to be like just one species in a genus, but they described some other species and they looked at morphology. One of the things that I was doing was looking at the DNA. Here, I've done an alignment of these DNA sequences, and you can see these top two rows, these two things are always the same, whereas the bottom two are different to the top two. They're more similar to each other, but they have some differences as well. So we had 3 species there. So Claire and Bernard also described an additional 6 species of a particular group called Hymodesmias, and this is one of them that they named after Rathlin, Hymodesmia rathlini. And it has these elevated pore sieves that are very flattened on top. So I think that's one that once you get your eye in for is easy enough to identify. So if we go round to the west of Dagenham Point on the northwest coast of Rathlin Island, again, that's where we get some really deep water. And I was just going to show you some of the cliffs there, what they look like. So the crayfish, which Bernard was diving on Mullaghmore and Sligo last weekend with some of the people from Dolphin Sub Aqua Club. And they'd said, oh, I saw a lobster that was sort of orange red and didn't have the big nippers on the front. Would that have been a crayfish? So yep, we do get them in Northern Ireland, although they're much rarer here. They come around the west coast. But as far as Rathlin, do they go any further around, or is that Oh, okay.
There are the maidens too. I've seen one there, but only one.
I think it's one of those species that is spreading as the seas get warmer, and it's would be interesting to date the observations as it, you know, when it's first recorded from the likes of the maidens or further around into the Irish Sea. And it's one of the Northern Ireland priority species. So it's really great if Seasearch can help build on what we know about the distribution of these priority species. And that's just a close-up. On the east coast of the island here, there's a really impressive wreck, and you can see it here on this. This is this multi-beam sonar that's created all this bathymetry of the seabed around Rathlin. So this is the wreck of the Loch Garry. And that's, I think, Claire Goodwin diving on it. And you can see the wreck itself is covered in life. You get really strong currents there, so it is a place where you do need to get the right slack. And Richard Lafferty of Alcoholics is very good at dropping you in and taking care of the divers. He knows the island really well. But that's Claire taking some wide angle photographs of the wreck. Around the base of the wreck is really interesting for marine life. This boulder that's covered in cup corals and antennae hydroids, underneath it you can just see these pair of long claws sticking out. And if we look a bit closer, they are the long-clawed squat lobster Munida rugosa, and that's them come out. And again, Munida is another one of the priority species. I'm not sure if Seasearch have it as a resource, but a few years ago, with funding that Sally Stewart-Moore got, who was the Seasearch coordinator prior to Gala, we did a series of little waterproof guides, including a stab jacket size fold-out photographic guide for the priority species. I'll make sure Bernard takes some with them at the weekend for Rathlin for those diving there, that they can familiarize themselves with some of the priority species that they might come across. And then this is the round crab, Atlas cyclus rotundatus. Since, well, it really can't be at all that there's anything runners involved in any way without having nudibranchs, and divers do seem to like them. So I put quite a few nudibranchs into the talk. This is one of the priority species of nudibranchs, Capillinea dorii. It used to be called Eubranchus dorii. No. So this is a studio shot of it. And then I don't know if you're likely to come across this, but I think several people would be quite excited if you did when you're diving. It's the fan mussel, Atrina fragilis. It's probably about 30, can be up to about 30 centimeters long. And Bernard took this photo on again, at the base of the Loch Garry on the east coast of Rathlin, but I don't think he's seen it there again, and it is a priority species and very rare. And that's it, sort of dug out of its burrow. And that's the distribution of the fan mussel, although some of those are historical records, so it's really not that common anymore. The shell is actually very thin, so it's susceptible to any mobile bottom fishing. And there are quite a few hydroid species on Rathlin's very rich for hydroids, and there's quite a few priority species there. Diphasia alata, Diphasia nigra, Polyplumeria flabellata, and Lytocarpia myriophyllum, and they are priority species. Just got some close-ups of a couple of them. Then more nudibranchs, so this is Primora papillata. Then this one is very common. You see it all around the coast, but it's quite spectacular. Fascilina auriculata. And this one feeds on the eggs of other nudibranchs. So often if you see a large spawn of nudibranchs, or nudibranch spawn, and you look in amongst it, you'll see this little guy with these two chocolate brown rhinophores. He's usually only about 10 to 12 millimeters long, so you do have to look closely. And this beautiful Antiopelia cristata, it feeds on bryozoans, and it's really spectacular. And then Okinia elegans, and this is one of the ones that even people who are really keen on nudibranchs don't often come across. But it's usually on their wish list of things they want to see. And it feeds on sea squirts. And sometimes all you see out of the side of the sea squirt are some gills sticking out. And the nudibranch itself is burrowed right inside the sea squirt, eating it from within with just its gills left out so it can respire. And that's a studio shot of it looking really spectacular. Up on Rathlin, we quite often come across these tiny little sparrows of spawn. And I think they were one of the things that, oh look, there's another little nudibranch. They were one of the things that Bernard was never sure what the spawn belonged to. So with the DNA barcoding project, I got a bit of the spawn and sequenced it so we could see what species it belongs to, because it's a very distinctive spawn coil, and it's something that if you're familiar with as Seasearch divers, and you know what species it belongs to, then you can record that species, even if it is just by the presence of the spawn. Because these, some of the species are really buried within these things that are growing on the rocks, and the spawn's the only evidence they're there. So this is the spawn that we sequenced, and it was Okinia aspersa. And so that was really quite nice to resolve what species that spawn belongs to. Some more priority species. We've got sea pens here, again, next to the wreck of the Loch Garry, and a beautiful photograph of a really impressive big ling. And a bit of an angry looking anglerfish. You can get some massive anglerfish up in Rathlin. Again, they're priority species. It's really nice that there is a ban on bottom fishing, because things like the anglerfish stand a chance of actually having somewhere with it. I think Bernard had a tale of diving up there once, and there was an absolutely massive anglerfish, and he wanted to get it to move so that it would lift its head better for the photo, and he grabbed it by the tail a bit, and this thing swam off, but then came back with a mouth that was about, I don't know, half a meter across, sort of snapping it up, and yeah, he deserved it. So you can see its teeth, and they have, basically these things are a head with a really big mouth and not much else to them, but they are beautiful. And place again is one of the priority species. And then this is just a nice photograph of a snake pipefish, which if you're diving in amongst the kelp and the seaweeds, they're more commonly found there. Leopard spotted gobies are relatively common. Cuckoo male, this is a lovely male cuckoo wrasse with the blue iridescence. And again, in places where you have good visibility, they tend to be really colourful. So that's nice to see. And then if you're lucky enough to ever get a night dive, there are little bobtail squid in Church Bay. There's quite often a lot of octopus there. And on the rare side of things, there is this burrowing anemone called Halcamploides elongatus. And that's really quite rare and special, but you do find it in Church Bay, but it's only out at night. What was I going to say? It's about Church Bay. Oh yes, so this is a priority species, this burrowing sea anemone, Arachnanthus sarcii, and these very elegant central tentacles that go inwards and then are recurved back, and how it holds these tentacles, again, they're very recurved and held back. It's quite distinctive. It would be nice if Seasearch is doing more diving around that area to get more sites for this anemone, because so far it's really only known from this side of Rathlin Island, and we don't have any other records for it in Northern Ireland. This little sea anemone, which Cuminotus, sea anemone, my goodness, nudibranch, definitely have had a long day. Again, a priority species, Cuminotus beaumonti, and it feeds on a hydroid that you get in the sand. Then we've got sea pen, Fergularia mirabilis. Some beautiful brittle stars. This is Ophiura, which is quite big. It's probably about 15 centimeters across. The mast crab, Charistes, again, quite common in the sand in Church Bay. And as the starfish Astropecten irregularis, with these distinctive purple tips and very regular spines on the arms. The scaphander, which is a gastropod which burrows in the sand. Looks like a poached egg. And the rose coral Pentapora Thodiaceae, and again, it's a priority species because it's very fragile to disturbance. Damicornis Bay, I think this is one of probably, Bernard's dived a lot on Rathlin. I think that's probably his favourite site, which is so rich in sponges and corals and things. So this is Axonella dissimilis, which is bright yellow, hand-like sponge, really quite slow growing. So this one, could be 50, 60 years old. And the little cup-shaped sponges, Axonella infundibuliformis here. and that's the Axonella damicornis. And then this is the football sea squirt, Diazona violacea, and again, this is something that you don't see that much of in Northern Ireland, and it can be huge, it can be 50 centimeters across. So that's, again, worth getting more records of that. The cushion star crania. I wanted to just say a little bit about, what's changed. So I'm losing my voice a bit. So this photograph was taken in County Sligo in 2020. And all of these sort of malformations on it are caused by this parasitic barnacle called Adna anglica. Now, we did a survey all around the Irish Coast from 93 to 97, and I think we only had a handful of records of this. It was really very rare and notable when you saw it. In Sligo now, on the west coast of Ireland, you can already find a cup coral that isn't covered in this parasitic barnacle. So that was Sligo in 2020. This is a cup coral of the Skerries just off Portrush in 2021, and you can see the parasitic barnacle on it. And then this is Rathlin in 2022, and this cup coral is a lot of the parasitic barnacle on it. So that's something that appears to be a consequence of climate change, that this parasite of the cup corals is spreading. We've no idea how it interacts with the coral, whether it can impact its feeding or its reproductive ability. We really just don't know, but it would be interesting to, with Seasearch and people who are taking photographs when they're underwater, to be looking to see if this barnacle is present, and over the years to monitor that. This is an invasive species. This is the marina in Rathlin. This kelp you can see here that has a broad midrib and a wavy pinnate frond is called wakame. Its Latin name is Undaria pinnatifida, and I found it up in Rathlin Marina last July. So that's an invasive species that's spreading there. And this is a pressed specimen of it. It comes from Japan and China and Korea, but it's been spreading both by shipping and by aquaculture. And that's its distribution now in Northern Ireland. NBN hasn't got the record yet from Rathlin. And then the compass sea squirt, Astercarpa humilis, which is quite common in the marina now in Rathlin. With the DNA barcoding project, we're also been looking at some of the squirts to see whether they're invasive or not. This was a species of Botuloides that we got. It doesn't match any DNA sequences that are on public databases. So is it something that's perhaps an undescribed species, or is it potentially a non-native? We went back over the photographs that are from the 1980s, and we did find species that look just like photographs that look just like this. So we suspect that it's a new species for the area rather than a recent moved in invasive. So that's quite a nice find. You can see this is our new species here, and it's not grouping closely on these sequences of these DNA sequences of any of the other known species. This is an undescribed nudibranch, a little dotum species that's on this Diphasia hydroid. And then I think it was a couple of years ago, or just pre-COVID was it, that Bernard found this anemone, which is very distinctive. It has this broad white column and then very short, even tentacles. And we've shown these photographs to several sea anemone experts that exist in the world, and no one has any idea what it is. So again, that's something I know Libby's keen to get back to the site and see if the sea searchers can find it. It would be really nice to try and figure out what it could be, or if it's a new species, to get it described as something that's quite special from Rathlin. And that's a close-up of it. So that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Bernard for taking lovely photographs, and to Deirdre, who've been providing me with funding to carry out the work that we're doing, trying to build up the identification resources and the DNA barcode library. So I'm going to stop sharing and put you back to Libby. And then if you've got any questions, we can